I'm Erica Frensley, and for my public health paper that I wrote for tragedy is on veteran suicide. So one reason why I picked this is because I'm a veteran. My ex is a veteran. Majority of my closest friends are veterans, and we all know someone who has killed themselves who was also a veteran. So the original 22 a day that goes around is from a study that happened in 2012. A more recent study done in 2014 showed that it's 20 veterans a day, so a slight lessened amount. But even when you go look into the military, it shows that there's a problem because it's the second highest cause of death. One thing I found interesting when I was doing the research was that 65% of the suicides were all performed by individuals who are 50 or older. They never stated why. Obviously, there's depression involved, but there is no were they depressed because they were in pain, because they were suffering mentally. The chart on the left shows the chance of suicide, or the rates of suicide, when you're a veteran male versus civilian male, and a veteran female versus a female civilian. So that just shows the increase that happens when you serve. So there's some possibilities that have been linked to the TBI, or to the suicide, and that's TBI, which is traumatic brain injury, and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So there was a study that was done that showed that those who had 2 or more traumatic brain injuries were twice as likely to have suicidal ideation. That's one of the only ways they've been able to try to track if someone might be suicidal, is by people being diagnosed as having suicidal ideation. Granted, that itself is flawed because that takes someone admitting that they have these ideas in their heads. They don't know what comes first, if it's just relates to the TBI, but the TBIs also increase the chances of developing major depressive disorder, which obviously links in with suicidal ideation. So that shows one possible correlation, and there's other studies that show that PTSD might be a cause for suicidal ideation. One of the head doctors, or neuropsychs from VA hospital, stated that they didn't want to oversimplify, but this has actually caused them to oversimplify the treatment that they're doing by not really expanding horizons, not trying to go after it a separate way. Right now, the VA is just trying to go after, oh, you're suicidal, here, let us help you, not getting to it before they get to the suicidal ideation. So this shows the VA solutions to try to bring down the number. They've said that it has helped. So, they have walk-in psych possibilities. So every clinic is supposed to have a walk-in psych ability. So one doctor a day is supposed to be able to take in walk-ins, but from what I've encountered, that's flawed. There's plenty of times that you go in for a walk-in and you have to wait because obviously there's probably more than one person walking in, and they still do have appointments. They tend to overbook their doctors. So they have a crisis line, but obviously you need to know the number. They're trying to increase the awareness of paying attention to your battle buddies, talking to people when you feel down, and they're trying to increase the number of doctors that they have to treat veterans who need more immediate treatment. I understand that this is a very troubling image, but to me this means a lot, because a lot of us veterans disagree that the VA is doing enough. So there's been a sharp increase. You may have seen it on the news, that there have been a lot of veterans killing themselves on VA property. There was one individual, he shot himself in his car and left a note. And in his note, it stated that, one second, I have it written down. I don't want to flub up the words. Okay, there it is. I bet if you look at the 22 suicides a day, you'll see VA screwed up in 90%. So these veterans have gone, some of them have been turned down treatment, some of them have been kicked out of treatment because they didn't follow exact protocol, which is a very common thing with veterans. To go from you have no choice but to do what everyone says to do, to having freedom and retaliating against it. But then there's also the aspect of you don't need this help, it's a weakness. But if you break their protocol, you get kicked off, and you're treated like a troubled child versus a person that needs help. So with the 22 suicides in 18 months on VA property, Congress has now introduced a bill, and the bill will make it so the VA has to provide information to them in an expedient manner that shows what is going on in that veteran's life before they committed suicide. So like if there were signs leading up to them committing suicide, because it's not as simple as them always spinning out of control and talking about it before they kill themselves. Why is a big thing that I think needs to be pursued on this and not really being touched on too much, because this is a much higher rate than what we're used to from war. But granted, this is also a very, very long engagement that's been going on. If we could find out why there was such a high uptick of suicides, then that could prevent or save future generations from having to go through this. So another possible link that I found interesting was, I read this a long time ago, I had to bring the article up again. A retired Navy SEAL texted his wife one day on March 12th, 2014. He said, "Sorry, baby, I love you all." He did that before he shot himself in his car and killed himself. His wife donated his brain to research. 4 months later, they contacted her back and said that he had suffered from chronic trauma encephalopathy. I can't pronounce this word. Encephalopathy. So it's a degeneration of the nerves within the brain, of the myelin sheaths, and it can cause mood swings, memory problems, changes of personality, a whole wide array of what would be considered other psychiatric problems. Currently, it can only be diagnosed post-mortem, and since they can't know beforehand, they don't know how to treat it. It was previously known in football, but also other contexts, so sports, for the people that had committed suicide, if they were checked for CTE, 99% of the time they had it. The studies, though, they say it's hard to decide if CTE causes depression and suicidal thoughts, or if they just happen to be comorbid, so they happen to just exist at the same time. Currently, there's actually research going on to try to diagnose it, so then they can try to find ways to treat it. So this image, the brain on the left shows a person with PTSD, and a brain image on the right shows with no PTSD. This shows how much activity is going on in the brain at any given just resting time. As we can see, the PTSD brain is much more lit up. There's a ton of activity, and that goes on constantly. My ex actually had this same imaging done, and there's light ups all over the place because the brain cannot shut off. It's stuck in this mode. So they found that the individuals with PTSD have a high, that suffer shame. So like they're ashamed that they survived or shamed from going through what they went through, whether it's they didn't fight well enough or they were sexually assaulted. They have a higher risk of suicidal ideation. Now, there's a 15% diagnosed with PTSD and 14% diagnosed with suicidal ideation. I find these numbers troubling because in the military, most of the time veterans view PTSD as a weakness. So you don't talk about it. You don't talk when you think about killing yourself. You don't talk about when you're feeling down. You don't tell people when you're triggered, I guess would be the word, because it's viewed as a weakness. So these numbers I feel are very skewed because without people being honest, there's not going to be real numbers. So the signs of suicide. These are the signs that are easier to tell because when they're talking to their friends. But not all veterans go through the list of being suicidal. There's some that do it as a way to escape. I had a friend who was seeking help through the VA and was denied because he was addicted to pain pills due to back injuries he had received from deployment. And he ended up killing himself in front of his family. It wasn't, none of his friends could tell that was a possibility that he would do that. So getting someone help is extremely difficult when they don't want it. Involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility is only 72-hour hold, and so they're no longer a risk to themselves or others. Now, it's called the Legal 2000, and the next bullet point I experienced myself, if the conversation is not recorded or written like through text messages or emails, then it's their word against yours. So they can say they're going to kill themselves or that they're going to cause harm to someone else. And you can call the police and try to get them committed. They will tell you that it's your word against theirs, that there's nothing that can really be done about it. And even if they are brought in for an evaluation, doesn't mean that they're going to be committed. So if you fail to get them help on that attempt, you will probably lose them as a friend. They'll probably not feel safe talking to you. So then you can't help them anymore. So it's kind of risky. It's not set up in a way to help people that are suffering. Let's see. So the VA here in Las Vegas, at least, they have no ability to enforce an involuntary commitment. So any veteran that gets committed will not be going to the VA. They will not get the VA records as to what their treatments have been, what injuries they have, and a lot of psychiatric facilities are not able to handle veterans because a lot of them have traumatic brain injuries, and that changes how and what medications can be given. My ex story, he was on a Legal 2000, and they released him a week later despite him thinking the staff was trying to kill him and not taking meds, because they can't force you to take meds unless you're deemed incompetent. They released him because they said I could get him better help than what they could get him because of his wide array of physical problems. So they sent him home and he ended up almost dying from an attempted suicide. So yeah, obviously there's some problems in trying to find help. So I think this is an epidemic of epic proportions. I have a buddy who's tried committing suicide 4 times. My ex has tried committing suicide 3 times. I've known several people who were successful, and that's why I understand when veterans return home from war, that doesn't mean that their battles are done, which is kind of what a lot of veteran projects are trying to push right now. That like one project right now is the Till Valhalla, because when you die in battle, and they consider suicide losing your battle, that will meet you on the other side. I think it needs to be addressed quickly because we have an obligation to take care of those who signed their names on a blank check, not just to say, oh, you're back home, congratulations, go out to the world. Finding the cause, not just finding a treatment that won't work for most people, I think would be one step to lessening the suffering that not just these individuals go through, but their families too, because when they lose this, the downhill spiral doesn't just affect them, it affects their spouses, it affects their children, it affects their friends, and it's a very painful thing to watch. So yeah, this is what the public health area that I decided to write on. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you.